Hi, I'm Allie with PotomacBeads.com, and today's Better Beader episode is going to help you navigate the basic stitches used in bead weaving. Today's Better Beader episode is going to be about stitches. So there may be stitches or projects that you're looking at, bracelets that you already have, and you may want to think about making them yourself. A lot of the problem with making something yourself or visually knowing how it's done prior to actually seeing instructions or watching YouTube videos is recognizing the basic stitches in their most simplistic, flat or straight form. I'll be going over in a different Better Beader, seeing things in the round or things kind of combined with one another, but I wanted to go over the basic stitches and the actual look of those stitches. The first thing I wanted to start with was something that you usually are doing when you're a very young child, if you're kind of into crafting, and this is going to be ladder stitch. So this bracelet here, although it's embellished on the top, has the ladder stitch base. Ladder stitch is generally done with multiple beads in a row. When the ladder stitch is done, it's going to have a ladder look that you have rungs of the ladder. Whether or not this is done with one needle or two needle doesn't really matter. You can go up the side and go up and do the rungs. But what's going to happen with this ladder stitch is that you're adding a grouping of beads above another group. Taking 3 beads on your needle, adding another 3, and circling the thread back through the 3 that you just created, as well as the 3 that you did. It's done in a series of figure 8s that are added along the project as you pass the thread line. When the beads line up straight like that you know it's not done on a loom or having a loom style where you'll see actually threads down the center rows as well, you're going to assume that it is ladder stitch. Generally speaking, most ladder stitch is beneficial to embellish or do something on top of. Also, you are generally going to see multiple beads in a row rather than just one. When one bead is used, it's often called square stitch. Square stitch is going to be basically the equivalency of ladder, but again, you're adding one bead at a time. You have one bead on, and you're going back down one bead at a time, and then back through and kind of going around and adding your one bead on. There are YouTube videos too to all of these bead stitches as well if you want to actually learn the stitches. This is more learning how to identify them. In a square stitch project, you're also going to have the beads line up in a line, but you're going to see more thread and needle, almost in a loom style, going through. Generally speaking, square stitch is only going to be done to get that straight across loom style if you don't have a loom. Also, if your ladder stitch is so wide that it's going to be flimsy, that's where you're going to kind of sew them together. If you're doing square stitch and adding multiple beads in a row long, generally speaking, you're going to put on these 5 beads here, put on one more bead and stitch in, add a bead, stitch in, add a bead, stitch in, kind of circling around. That's going to be your alternative to a loom, is to do that ladder stitch and the square stitch with it. So we have the ladder and square. Again, these can always be embellished along the top, and you can add to them as well. The next stitch that I wanted to show would be peyote stitch. So these are also, generally speaking, the order in which I believe is easiest to learn or you may have learned. Peyote stitch is done that it's going to look like a brick wall. This one here has the V, that chevron pattern, and you can see that it's easy to establish lines or to actually establish rows because the beads are going every other bead. This is going to be done in an add a bead, sew through a bead fashion. Add a bead, sew through a bead. Add a bead, sew through a bead. Generally speaking, there is odd count and even count peyote. It's much easier to learn even count, but when looking at a project, even if it's something again that's embellished, you can generally flip the project over and look and see right away that this stitch is not going to look like the ladder stitch that I showed before. You can see that building block that you still have rows down, and then the rows across are interrupted in that brick interlocking fashion. This is a key stitch to learn in order to do other things in the round or in the tubular shape as well. So sometimes turning over a bracelet and seeing the base or the bottom of the bracelet is going to help to determine what the actual stitch is, and then how to go about embellishing it or adding to the look. You also have multi-hold beads that can be used in that same fashion. So this here is Peyote stitch with super duo beads. Here's Peyote stitch with rulas, super duos, and some round duo beads as well in the San Andreas. So don't limit yourself to looking at the beads in necessarily when they're all the exact same beads. Here is a freeform Peyote stitch with all different shaped beads as well. So keep in mind, the stitch isn't always going to look super nice and even, but again, if you follow those rows, you'll be able to determine what the actual stitch is. Like the Peyote stitch and the actual ladder or square stitch, there's also another stitch that you may learn called netting. Netting necessarily isn't an actual scientific kind of stitch, but you get this exact, like it says, netting design. The idea of the netting is that you're using seed beads to connect other beads. This is done a lot to do Christmas ball covers. I do it a lot actually to cover and go around rivolis or kind of cinch things in. It's easy for a netting to get smaller and larger, and it's very forgiving as far as movement. You can get it smaller and larger and has a little bit of a pull to it. That's going to be netting. Generally speaking, if there's not an exact kind of science to it, when you're looking at it, you may be looking at just a netted design. Netted designs as well can be embellished along the top. You can go back in and add some more beads, add some seed beads in here as well. So again, that's going to be your netted design. Used a lot for holding things in as well as covering like Christmas balls. That's used a ton. One of my personal favorite stitches, and some people have a really hard time learning this, is going to be the herringbone stitch. I love the look of herringbone, which is adding 2 beads at a time and creating rows. These are going to create straight rows, more of like a looming effect, that the holes are going to line up next to one another, not in the peyote where they're going to sit kind of staggered like a brick wall. These are going to be done in rows. They also look like a V. That's why I brought this lily pond one in here to flip over along the back again. So the front, you can't necessarily see what it is, although if you've got an eye for herringbone, you'll see that herringbone along the side. But if you flip the project over, you can see 2 interlocking rows of herringbone. Herringbone again is going to get that V shape because you're adding multiple beads at a time and sewing through, adding multiple beads at a time and sewing through. This is herringbone stitch with a 2-hole bead versus a herringbone stitch here in the American flag bracelet, which is a delica based pattern. You can see here the red and the white create rows and create the nice herringbone flow. Herringbone can also be done with 2 needles to create still that locking version like the Pegasus bracelet. This is with storm duos where they're crossing back and forth and you're using 2 needles to still get that herringbone look, but it allows you to embellish the sides a little bit easier. Again, still establishing that V and getting that V look to know that it is a herringbone stitch. The high garden bracelet will also show the herringbone with something in the middle of the stitch. When you're doing herringbone stitch, generally you're starting out with a ladder or a brick stitch. That's the traditional way to start. There's kind of faster ways to start, but generally a ladder or a herringbone, or I'm sorry, a ladder or a brick stitch is going to get you the start to the herringbone bracelet. This also, like I said, can create rows and you can have gaps in between. Looking at the sides of the bracelet often is a good indicator as far as the herringbone stitch, even if it's not necessarily right in your face, that you know it's herringbone. One of the other stitches that I have here to show you is a very simple stitch, although people complicate it and overly complicate it. This is right angle weave. Right angle weave I have here showing the larger beads being used so you can see the squared pattern that you're getting. Right angle weave is a series of boxes or a series of squares. Here is a 2-row right angle weave where you're creating boxes that are interlinking with one another. Unlike the ladder stitch or the peyote stitch or the herringbone stitch, in the right angle stitch, the holes of the beads are not all facing in the same direction. Right angle weave has beads facing that the holes are facing 2 up and 2 to the side. So you're going to have 2 vertical and 2 horizontal, creating these boxes and creating a nice netting of the herringbone, or of the right angle weave stitch, Whether or not you have extra seed beads or whether or not you embellish along the top like the tidal wave bracelet, you can also add a second row to that right angle weave. The right angle weave is a series of figure 8s where again the thread kind of follows in a circle, which creates that nice rounded effect, or those squares of right angle weave. Often right angle weave is going to be referred to as raw, which is just a shortened version, right angle weave. So it's just that acronym for RAW, and that's going to be the shortened way that it's often written in patterns for you to get a hang on. A lot of right angle weave projects, when I'm teaching beginners, I'm going to choose to do 2 needles. That's going to show exactly how to do that right angle weave and how the holes of every other bead are going to be sitting opposed to one another. Again, turning over the project, you may not know from the top, because there's some netting action along the top or some embellishing, that this is right angle weave, but if you turn the project over, generally speaking, you can distinguish and figure out the stitches. Even if something is a little complicated, kind of peek below the actual little lines and you can see what the base is. In addition to some of these basic stitches, there's a multitude of others, going from brick stitch here, which gets smaller and bigger, to a flat spiral, to St. Petersburg stitch, and all kinds of others in between that are really specialized. The stitches that I showed you with the different bracelets are the ones that I consider the most basic and the easiest to identify when looking at them. You get to a point then when you look at a project like something like a triangle, and you can see in this project that it actually combines and uses 2 different stitches. Some projects may not stick to 1 stitch in order to complete them. This has the herringbone down the sides, as you can see that nice V and that bright blue, and then along the sides you can see those building blocks of the peyote stitch that's getting bigger and smaller along the herringbone. So as you're looking and as you're determining which stitch the base is of the project, keep in mind that it could be a combination of stitches that you're looking and seeing upon. The more you do and the more you make in the jewelry world, the easier it will be to identify these different stitches as you're looking at them. Once you complete and do every stitch, obviously, you get a better handle on what the stitches are, and you can look at projects and actually start to design them and know them ahead of time as you're looking at them. Again, looking from peyote stitch to right angle weave to herringbone to square stitch, you're going to get a nice eye for the design and a nice idea of where the design should go, even if it's something that you do need instructions for. You may even start to look at projects and realize that you don't need instructions at all, because they are very simple weaving techniques. Usually ahead of the time in my videos, I try to just say exactly what the stitch is that you'll be learning, even if it's not traditionally used, like something like this herringbone in the Pegasus bracelet. Keep in mind, like I said, there's a number of other stitches that I didn't go over in this basic beading. In the Better Beader videos, I like to kind of keep them short and simple and answer a lot of beginner questions and things you should know. There's tons and tons more stitches below, and if you want to actually comment below this video, list all the different stitches that I did not go over, and that'll be helpful for people watching this video to know what the different names of the different stitches are called. Even if the comments, if you want to stay a little example of what the stitch is, that's a great idea. Again, the idea of the Better Beader videos is to make more informed beaders and more informed customers that are part of our community and can make the best of their ability when doing their craft. You are also part of that community and can help and engage with that as well. Also keep in mind that in addition to these Better Beader videos, we have tons of YouTube tutorials showing how to do every one of the bracelets that are here, as well as telling you other wonderful little tips, techniques, secrets, as well as new beads and new products. If you want to get these regular videos, you can also subscribe to this YouTube channel. Give me a little thumbs up if you like the video. That's helpful to show exactly what you like and what you want to see more of. As always, you can also shop from us online at PotomacBeads.com and PotomacBeads.eu. We're happy to send you patterns and beads galore. In addition, join our Facebook group for beading and jewelry making. Show off what you make. Join an awesome community of individuals that are really engaging, love to help design making, and really make it such a delight to be part of the beading world. As always, thank you so much for watching this Better Beader episode designed to make you a better beader.